I recently came across a couple Doug DeMuro videos of late that I really loved. He made one talking about cars that he regretted selling and one talking about cars that he regretted not buying. And I thought these were wonderful premises. I loved the cars that he talked about. He actually mentioned a couple discussions that he'd had with me over the early years talking about an LM002. But check out those videos on the Doug DeMuro channel to hear about his car regrets. And it motivated me to think back through some of the cars that I really regretted letting go of and to make a video of my own car buying and selling regrets. I'll start with 5 cars that I do regret selling. And the first one is a 2000 Ferrari 360 Spider with a manual transmission. It was actually a car that I had as part of the supercar rentals fleet. It was the 3rd car that I purchased for that company. It was super high miles when I sold it, 60, 70,000 miles, and it has popped up for sale a couple of times since then, and I was certainly in no position to continue owning the car when I had to sell it as I transitioned into working for Lamborghini Atlanta, and I did well owning the car financially. It was a wonderful rental car despite being a manual transmission. To be honest, there was less of an enthusiast attraction to a gated manual Ferrari at the time, but it was a rough car. It was a Eurovin. It had been a gray market import legitimately, but I just loved the car, and it was always the one that I would reach for to take to events and things like that. And I have tried every time it's come back up for sale to buy it, and it always just seems to be like 20 or 30% more than I feel like the car should be. And I'm probably wrong because in each circumstance it has sold, and there's been some money spent on it. It looks a little bit different now. They've had different wheels and stuff like that, but that is one that I constantly think of bringing back into the fold. The second one is the Paris Hilton SLR. Now, a factor that's very important to understand is that I was never in a position to keep owning these cars in order to have the cars that I have today. And like Doug, I've never been happier with the collection of cars that I get to jump into and drive each day now. So it's not really worth keeping any of these if it keeps me from where I am. And so the SLR was just one of those cars that everybody loved, everybody had positive memories with for different reasons, I suppose, but it was just such a great car. And SLRs all drive wildly differently, but that one drove wonderfully well. So I sold it for a bunch of cryptocurrency to a guy in Bulgaria, and he has had a few problems with it. He's had a lot of problems with it, I'll be honest with you. So those would have been very painful. But I mean, ultimately, my 430 Scuderia became the SLR, which became the salvage title red Mercy SV, which became the manual blue Cars and Bids Murcielago, and that became half the Bugatti. And so all those trades were very worthwhile, very profitable, and it allowed me to have a car that I do meaningfully enjoy more, but I do love the Paris Hilton SLR. If it hadn't been overseas and it had been an easier transaction, I actually talked to the guy about trading the Yakuza Diablo SV for the SLR coming back, which I really would have liked to do, but because of tariffs and everything else, it just really would not have worked at this point. But I am glad it is in good hands. Up next is my Grigio Telesto 2007 manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP640. It was a Canadian car, and I bought it as the free Lamborghini. I used the profit from the very nice US low-mile Verde Ithaca car that I'd owned for a little while. As we started VINwiki, I found this car. I was able to, kind of cartwheel all the deals together to use the profit, buy this car, and it was free. I literally owned, for the first time, like a Lamborghini with a title in a drawer, and it was a wonderful feeling. And, I ultimately felt like that might not be, from a condition perspective, the one that I wanted to keep forever, and I knew that I was always going to be heavily attached, both meaningfully in driving and emotionally and psychologically, to the world with manual transmission LP640s. And so I thought that if I ever got the opportunity to trade into a nicer car, I would. Ultimately, I found clean title, black car, painted at Verde Draco, and I love having that one. But after I sold the car, I learned a little bit more about its story, that it was owned by an Iranian terrorist that had been kicked out of the country, who became a drug dealer and a car dealer in Canada, and the car had been crashed by a drunk 15-year-old and abandoned in the middle of a Toronto highway, and then kind of smuggled out of the country to Lebanon to be fixed, and then brought back in on a bonded title. And I just thought, that is the coolest car story ever, at least in my sense of cool car stories. And if I had known how deep the story went and how crazy the story got, I don't know that I could have let the car go, and it would have been worth turning it into a better version of itself and doing a little bit more restoration on, but I do miss that one. At least I miss its story. The other two that I thought of were really my favorite Car Trek cars, and even though the manual transmission Flood Gallardo is the Car Trek car that I owned the longest, my favorite Car Trek car was the Car Trek 4 Flooded 599. I adored that car. I put about 6,000 miles on it between the amazing drive that we did as part of the series up to Gateway, Colorado, which I think is the greatest road in America, and just continuing to own, use, and enjoy the car. I didn't fit in it perfectly, and that's one of the reasons I was able to let it go, and it was a little bit more liquid than the Scud was at the time. But to be honest, I enjoyed day-to-day using the 599 more than the Scud, even though I had wonderful, wonderful memories in the Scud. I actually posted this on Instagram recently and asked what cars people regretted, and I said that the 599 was really the biggest one for me. And there were several people who said, well, why not the Scud? Isn't that better? And yes, it is a better car in every sense of the word, but I got to have all the memories I could ever want, all the experiences in that 430 Scuderia, and so I didn't miss it quite as much. And so, I don't know. I do miss the 599 an awful lot, and I've made several offers to get it back. And the last of the five is another Car Trek car. It was a 2010 Bentley Continental Super Sports, a black car that we had wrapped green, kind of like the radium green from the Pikes Peak edition of the car. I loved that car. It actually behaved itself quite well for having like 180,000 miles on it. And so I drove it for a good while. And as I was sort of consolidating cars at the end of 2023, I just said, you know what, this is one that has to go. Mostly because I hadn't had a bad outcome. And I knew that I was headed for one inevitably just due to it being an aging Bentley. And I was like, I am going to stop while I'm ahead, even though I don't know that there was a car from the Car Trek fleet that I would have loved to own and enjoy more miles in, more than that car. And so it went away for some reason. I sold it to this woman down in Savannah, Georgia, and she drove it home and paid for it immediately. I made a good profit on the car, and it showed up not too long later at a CarMax auction. They had unwrapped it, so it wasn't green anymore, but they still had all the Car Trek stickers on the windows. So we had the Ticket Clinic and Auto Tempest and the Car Trek logo, and I don't know why they did that, but it ran back through. It's bounced around a little bit, and I think it had a lot of reported errors during that CarMax auction, but hey, I did love it at the time. Up next is the cars that I regret not buying, and I found this one very, very interesting from Doug. It's one of those things that we all have these regrets, these cars that got away, these cars we should have had, and it's really not about the financial aspect of it, like the Wyclef Jean $600,000 opportunity at the McLaren F1. It's really about the cars that we would have enjoyed driving all those miles. And the biggest one for me is a car that was also on his list, but mine was a very specific one, a Ferrari 550 Maranello. Now, Doug tried to buy the Family Man 550 Maranello, which is a perfect color combination, Grigio Titanio over Bordeaux. Mine was white over Bordeaux, which is ultra rare. It's a 98 car that was local, and I tried to buy it over and over again because I knew the customer well. I had actually sold his Diablo for him, and he'd had this car for a long time. It was very neglected. It needed a lot of service, and he had just kind of kicked a lot of cans down the road. It was a perfect car for my taste in cars, and I loved it. I remember the lowest it ever got was $55,000, and it would have probably needed $15,000, $20,000 to be made nice. I would have just driven it and made it okay, but at the time I thought it was a 40 grand car. And it was, and so I didn't buy it, and I very much wish I did. I loved it very, very much, and he still has it. I've still tried to buy it a bunch of times, but obviously now it's worth a whole lot more money, and getting to the point where I'm not sure I would derive the appropriate enjoyment out of the car, and it would have kept me from buying other cars that I really would have liked, but again, that was one that I really, really wanted. The next one is a 2010 Lamborghini Gallardo LP 550-2 Valentino Balboni in blue Chelum, so the same color as Kimi's Gallardo, and I had won an auction for this car. I knew it was coming up, and so it was actually a car that was bought back under lemon law, and so it would have been the first Lamborghini that I would have bought and actually had the title, and I had sold the Kimi Gallardo because I was trying to buy a lemon law Superleggera, and that went for too much money, and so I needed a car, and this car came up for sale. And when the people at the factory would organize these auctions, they would happen on a Mannheim platform, but it was closed to just Lamborghini dealers, and they always made them end at really inconvenient times for people that were otherwise in the act of selling cars. And so I remember this one was ending on a Saturday afternoon, which is the worst time to try to get in touch with a car dealer because we're going to be so busy. But I was determined. I wanted this car, and I thought there was a chance that it was going to go cheap enough, because at the time, a good Gallardo, and there was no premium at all for the fact that this was a true gated manual car. I think one of 5 US manual Balbonis, but I might be wrong in that. But the only one in blue Chelum. It had ceramic brakes and it had been bought back for a perpetual check engine light through, I think, the New Jersey store, Long Island, one of those. And so Lamborghini owned it, and they'd actually allowed Balboni to use it for a long time whenever he needed a car for US-based press events. So there's some wonderful pictures of him with the car. He actually had called me at one point because he thought a different Balboni that we had stocked in was a manual car, and that's what he really wanted to buy. Ultimately, he bought a British car that's orange, and so I loved the idea of this car, and because of the way it was ending, I won the car for about $80,000, and I could not have been any more excited because that was really the extent of what I could afford to just pay cash for a car at that point in my career. And so we won it. I was ready. I was like, bill us out. And then immediately Lamborghini Gold Coast just threw a fit because they could see what the selling price had been. And they were like, well, we would have paid more. And they said that they had been trying to bid and that for some reason, Manheim had acted up, which it doesn't really do. It's one of the most stable online auction platforms that we've ever seen. And so they insisted that Lamborghini rerun it. And I was like, well, can we not hold them to this? And ultimately we couldn't. And so they did rerun it. I ran up a little bit higher, but I couldn't go much higher. And they ended up paying like $125,000 for it. And then they sat on it in inventory for a really long time. So they weren't buying it for a customer. They were just buying it so I couldn't have it. And so I really, really wanted that car. It's owned by a very good customer and friend of John Tamarian's now, and he loves it. And so no real hope at getting that one back, but I think that is the best US Gallardo made. Number 3 is actually a Porsche, and I am not much of a 911 guy, but I feel like I missed a couple of opportunities that could have turned me into one because I had the 993, didn't love it. Had the 996 Tina for Car Trek 6, didn't really love it. Had the 997 Roof, definitely didn't love it. But there was another roof car that I thought was perfect. It was a 996 GT2 with a bunch of miles, a really, really cool car. I think it had a little bit of paint work as well, and so it was always cheap for the market, but always just out of reach for me financially. I made a couple of stabs at it. It was one of those legendary 6-speed online forum cars owned by a guy named Martin, and he's had a lot of other amazing cars as well, but I always really, really wanted it. It was not a roof W09 VIN car. It was a modified 911 GT2, and I just never put a deal together. Also, every time that I had the roof and I looked at anything for sale, I always felt like I would have rather had a 997.1 0708 GT3 RS in orange or green, and those cars were 80 to 90 grand forever. And they were wonderful deals there because to me, that was just everything that you could ever want a Porsche to be. A manual transmission, rear wheel drive, big wing, bright color, cool, simple interior. I thought it made a lot of sense. I don't think that makes sense at today's money, and I certainly wouldn't be able to derive an appropriate amount of enjoyment at today's money, but at that, I think it could have been a car that I kept for a very long time. One of the things that Doug said, and I feel the same way, is that we both grew up loving Ferraris so very much that it feels odd to not own any Ferraris right now, as we have so many of our dream cars. But I can't think of the right Ferrari to kind of put in my lineup and add to the cars except for one, and it is probably my favorite car that I ever sold at Lamborghini Atlanta, and it wasn't all that expensive. I sold it in the low twos, and it was a 2009 16M, so the convertible version of the Scud in Bianco Fuji over red leather, and it was a spectacular car. I sold it to my best customer. He lived up in Memphis, Tennessee. He actually passed away last year, and I had always told him, like, when you ever want to get rid of anything, that is the car that I want. Please let me know. He said it was in his will. He didn't have kids. It was not to give it to me, but to let me at least have a crack at it. But the big batch of his Ferraris got sold off to a wonderful collector who collects much nicer cars than that one was. It had some paint work and some things like that, but at the end of the day, I lost it. But it is certainly my favorite Ferrari that was ever realistic for me to own. The last one that I really should have found a way to buy was the orange Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera, the 2008 car that I saw in the Target parking lot near my house and found out that it was stolen, and we went through that whole thing about the first stolen Lamborghini that we were ever able to recover here at VINwiki, and that was such a meaningful thing for the channel. It was one of the first videos that truly blew up and became like national news about the nature of the theft and the story of the car and everything like that, and I think it's been for sale 2 or 3 times since then, and now it's been very heavily modified. It's really not to my taste, but it was just such a big example of aligning the VINwiki app with the VINwiki YouTube content model and empowering the audience to accomplish such cool things. And I like the car. I think they're wonderful Gallardos to own. And so I don't know what I'd use it for today. Whenever it would pop up, I generally had the Car Trek Flood Gallardo at the time, and I'm like, well, I think I like that one better, but I like the story. So it's just one of those things that it's always hard to know where you're gonna put something or where you're gonna find the money to buy it, but that's one that I kind of wish that I had. And of course, there's a few others that I simply couldn't have afforded. At one point, I had the chance to buy Roy Katz's manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP670 SV, one of 5 known cars. Maybe there's 2 more that we're still trying to find, but that would have been an amazing one. But I still, at that time, I just couldn't get to the number that he needed, even though it was a wonderful value. And one that's kind of off the wall that I didn't even expect myself to want as badly, but when John Tamarian tracked down the Monaco pace car Countach, I was like, I should buy that car. That is the coolest Countach I think that exists. It has one of the best stories. It's the coolest car to take around to events. It's eligible for everything you'd ever want to go to. I couldn't have paid the $1 million or so that it was probably worth at the time, but I thought, that is the Countach to own. I also couldn't fit in it well enough to use it at any kind of frequency, so that is one of those things. Another one that Doug talked about was cars that he still wanted to buy, and there is a very fast narrowing list of cars that I would still like to own. Certainly most pertinent at the moment is a McLaren F1. Not pertinent in my ability to do so, but because I have had such a great recent McLaren F1 experience that I would love nothing more in the car owning world than to find a way to own one. I have not devised such a plan just yet, but it is one of those constant schemings that is going on. I also kind of want a pre-war Bentley. I've struggled a bit to understand how they are all very reconstructed and built from multiple cars parts and stuff like that, but I just think they're as cool as it could be. Pre-war cars in general are declining, and I think there's an audience opportunity there to make some really fun content at events that young people, I'm not that young anymore, but people at my age don't even go to, much less people younger than me. But I think that would be a whole lot of fun. I just haven't really figured out which ones make sense or which one's the right one to use, but they're supposed to be wonderful to drive, and I have not gotten that chance, but Greg Porter keeps inviting me out, and I will have to do that. Another one would be an Enzo or an MC12. That's the first Super Ferrari that I could fit in and drive comfortably. There's some great high-mile examples. I've made some very insulting offers. There's the one that was struck by lightning in Arizona that we're still trying to track down, but I think those would be wonderful cars to add, and the right Ferrari to put alongside my other stuff if the finances and the opportunity ever worked. Another one is a Defender 110. I think I'm almost past the trauma of the 6-wheeled Car Trek 10 Range Rover to get to a point where I could own and enjoy that car. But I would love to have a nicely built 110. My wife has actually entertained the idea of driving one. That could be a very interesting demarcation from the current electric car leases, but that would be fun. And of course, the Ferrari, the one Ferrari that I really want to own the most is the Ferrari Daytona that Brock Yates and Dan Gurney won the first competitive Cannonball in. Right now, it is parked at the Savoy Museum right next to my CL55 from the Cannonball record. I'm going to be doing a talk there with Bill Warner and Pam Yates on November 8th, I believe. So check out their website for tickets to that and more. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. I have tried many times to negotiate with the billionaire owner of this car, and I have not made any headway. So probably won't ever get that one, but that is the Ferrari to add to the garage. If you get a ticket, the first thing you should do is text a picture of it to 305-305. That will get the ticket clinic on your case immediately. You'll be facing costly fines, risks of suspension, possible jail time, points on your license, higher insurance premiums, and a lot of bad things that they can help you to avoid. You can also find them at the link in the description below, but the Ticket Clinic is a nationwide law firm with brick and mortar offices in Georgia, Florida, and California, but they've got attorneys everywhere, and that's what's most important, because a local attorney will know exactly how the local laws work, know the people who are in charge, and get you the best outcome possible. So text a picture of your ticket to 305-305 or click the link in the description below to fight your ticket with the Ticket Clinic.